My friends, what if I told you that in just 72 hours? The world as you know it almost changed forever. I am talking about a secret meeting in the heart of Ouagadougou that sent tremors through the boardrooms of Geneva and the halls of power in Washington. It was an event so explosive that the mainstream media had to look the other way, fearing what would happen if the truth actually reached your ears. I am Ibrahim Traoré, and today I am revealing the details of a high-stakes operation that nearly cost us everything we have been fighting for. If Ibrahim Traoré and Bobi Wine successfully build an African economic shield, could it lead to the final collapse of the global dollar dominance that has funded the West for decades? And more importantly, why is the mainstream media so terrified of you knowing the truth about a single question that brought a room of world leaders to a haunting silence? This is not just a story about a summit in Burkina Faso. This is a warning to every person who values freedom, especially for my brothers and sisters in the African diaspora who have watched from afar as our motherland was treated like a treasury for others to loot. Think about the elders in our villages, men and women over 50 who have spent their entire lives watching gold and lithium leave our soil while their own grandchildren study by candlelight. This struggle is for them. It is for the grandmother in Harlem who still dreams of a dignified Africa, and the father in Burkina Faso who is tired of seeing his country's wealth build skyscrapers in cities he will never visit. We are standing at a crossroads of history, where the small and the brave are finally standing up to the giants who have stayed rich by keeping us poor. This was never just a diplomatic meeting. It was a battlefield. On one side, we had leaders trying to reclaim their nation's destiny, and on the other, a shadow empire that uses betrayal as its primary currency. This was a move that directly threatened the stability of foreign mining interests and the very foundations of how the global economy extracts wealth from the vulnerable. But why did the most trusted person in the inner circle suddenly turn into a deadly weapon? We are going to expose the gears of this secret conspiracy right now and show you exactly what happens when you dare to challenge the status quo. But before we uncover the evidence that they tried to bury, I need you to do something important. If you believe that Africa deserves to stand on its own feet and that the truth should no longer be a secret, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right now. We are building a movement of the conscious. Please, share this video with someone who needs to wake up. And I want to see your strength in the comments below. If your heart beats for the freedom of our people, type Africa Rise. Let them know we are no longer silent. You know, people often ask me why the air in Ouagadougou feels different these days. It is not just the heat or the dust of the Sahel. It is the electricity of a people who have finally decided that their dignity is not for sale. But let me take you to a quiet corner of this city, far away from the presidential palace. I want you to meet Ousmane. He is 48 years old, with hands that look like they have been carved out of the very rock he spent 20 years mining. Ousmane used to work for a European conglomerate, digging for the minerals that power the smartphones and electric cars in the West. Today, Ousmane cannot even hold a spoon without his hands shaking from the chemicals he was exposed to. His land was taken, his health was stolen, and his pension, it exists only as a series of zeros on a paper he cannot even read. When I look into the eyes of men like Ousmane, I do not just see a citizen. I see the living evidence of why we are doing this. For Ousmane, this summit was not just a political meeting. It was his last hope that someone, somewhere, would finally stop the bleeding. The decision to invite Bobi Wine was what I call a grandmaster's opening move on a global chessboard. You see, the people who want to keep Africa divided think we are predictable. They think the leaders in the Sahel will stay in the Sahel, and the leaders in the East will stay in the East. But when a revolutionary soldier from Burkina Faso reaches out to a grassroots leader from Uganda, the ground starts to shift. It was a bridge between the Sahel and the Great Lakes region. It was a signal that the walls the colonial powers built to keep us apart were finally coming down. I remember writing that invitation. I wanted it to be personal. No cold emails, no formal diplomatic cables. I wanted a brother to speak to a brother, and I knew that our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, those brilliant minds in London, New York, and Paris were watching. I see your comments every day. I see the doctors, the engineers, and the professors living in the West who tell me, Ibrahim, we are ready to come home, but only if the house is safe. They represent a wealth of knowledge that the West has used to build its own empire, while our own schools and hospitals crumbled. This summit was meant to be the first stone in the foundation of that safe house. But while we were planning for the future, a shadow was moving right beside me. This is where it gets difficult to talk about, because betrayal does not come from your enemies. It comes from the person who eats at your table. It comes from the man who knows your children's names. I am talking about Laurent. He was my deputy chief of staff, a man I trusted with the very keys to our security. Laurent was efficient. He was professional. He was the kind of man who would finish your sentences before you could. But as we now know, he was also the kind of man who had a price tag on his soul. It started with a suggestion that seemed so logical at the time. Laurent came to me and said, "President, the original hall is too small for the international press. We need the National Assembly building, better acoustics, better broadcast lines, more prestige." On the surface, it sounded like he wanted to make Africa look good on the world stage. But in the world of high-stakes geopolitics, there is no such thing as a simple suggestion. This was the first gear in a machine designed to turn a moment of unity into a massacre. The moment the news of this summit leaked, the reaction from the Western capitals was like watching a hornet's nest get poked with a stick. They did not send congratulatory messages. No, they sent economic observers. They sent security advisors. The mainstream media started running stories about instability and concerns over democracy. Why? Because they know that if Burkina Faso and Uganda start trading on their own terms, the demand for the US dollar in those regions drops. If we control our own gold and our own lithium, the stock prices in Geneva and Brussels take a nosedive. This is the billion-dollar war that they do not want you to see. They want you to think it is just some tribal conflict or military junta. But tell me, since when does a simple military leader care about thermal imaging and encrypted financial transfers? They are terrified because we are starting to use their own tools against them. We are no longer the people who just provide the raw materials. We are becoming the people who understand the game. But Laurent had been busy while I was studying trade agreements. He was making visits to the maintenance levels of the National Assembly. He was clearing emergency contractors who had appeared out of nowhere. These were companies with no history, no offices, just a name on a piece of paper and a bank account in a tax haven. My instincts, the same ones that kept me alive in the trenches, started to itch. It is a feeling you get when the wind changes right before a storm. You cannot see the rain yet, but you can taste the ozone in the air. I stayed up until 3 in the morning that Tuesday. I pulled up the security logs myself. I saw that Laurent had accessed the underground levels 6 days in a row. He claimed it was for electrical upgrades. But when I looked at the power grid reports, there was no increase in consumption. The building was drawing the same amount of power it always did. So what was he doing down there in the dark? What was he installing that did not need electricity? The realization hit me like a physical blow. We were walking into a trap, and I had been the one to open the door. I looked at the list of confirmed delegates. Bobi Wine's name was there, shining like a target. If anything happened to him on our soil, it would not just be a tragedy. It would be the end of the Pan-African dream for the next 50 years. Uganda would blame Burkina Faso. The West would step in as the peacekeepers. And while we were burying our dead, the mining corporations would be signing new contracts for the very soil we were being buried in. But they forgot one thing. They forgot that we are the sons of Sankara. We do not just run when we see a trap. We wait. We watch. And then we turn the trap around. I picked up the phone to call the only man who has never lied to me. I needed to know what was in that basement before the sun came up. Can Africa truly stand on its own? Or are we destined to be betrayed by our own blood for the sake of a few foreign coins? I want you to think about that. I want you to look at the history of our continent and ask yourself if we are going to let the same story repeat itself. We are at a point of no return. The next few hours we're going to decide if we are a continent of leaders or a continent of victims. I want to hear from you. Do you believe that the new Africa is strong enough to survive this level of betrayal? Type New Africa in the comments if you stand with the truth. Let them see that we are watching them as closely as they are watching us. The world thinks Africa is just a place of chaos and charity. But if you look at the strategic map on my wall, you see something very different. You see a grand chessboard where the future of global energy and finance is being decided right now. This isn't just about gold or diamonds anymore. It is about the lithium for your electric cars, the cobalt for your satellites, and the rare earth minerals that keep the modern world running. And the people in the boardrooms of Geneva, London, and Washington know that if Africa unites, their ability to dictate prices and control the global dollar standard vanishes overnight. They don't just want our resources, they want our submission. While I was staring at those security logs in the middle of the night, I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone, thousands of miles away, in the heart of the West. There is a silent army of African diaspora intellectuals. These are our doctors, our cybersecurity experts, and our financial analysts who have been watching the money trails from their apartments in Brussels and Washington. They are the ones who started sending me encrypted warnings. They saw the shell companies being formed. They saw the $6 million transfer from a Geneva-based mining conglomerate moving through accounts in the Cayman Islands before landing in the pockets of people I called my colleagues. These brilliant minds are our secret weapon. They live in the belly of the beast, and they are feeding us the intelligence we need to survive. But the most critical piece of the puzzle was already in Ouagadougou. Her name is Grace Nalwanga. She is Bobi Wine's chief of security. But that title doesn't do her justice. Grace is a veteran of counterintelligence with years of experience in the Great Lakes region. She had arrived in our city 2 days early, disguised as a corporate security consultant. While my own team was busy with the logistics of the summit, Grace was in the streets, monitoring the radio frequencies and tracking the movement of foreign operatives. She didn't trust the official channels. And thank God she didn't. Grace had discovered something that made my blood run cold. She had used thermal imaging equipment, the kind that the mainstream media tells you we don't know how to use, and she pointed it at the National Assembly building. Even though the basement was supposed to be empty and the maintenance levels were sealed, the heat signatures told a different story. There was human activity down there. There was heat from equipment that shouldn't have been there. She knew a trap was being set, but she didn't know who she could trust. On the third night, they tried to silence her. 3 professional assassins, likely former mercenaries hired by the mining group, burst into her hotel room. They had her room number. They had the master key. They had the silence of the hotel staff. But they didn't have the heart of an African warrior. Grace didn't scream. She didn't beg. She fought. She took down one of them with her own hands and used the chaos to escape through a window into the dark alleys of Ouagadougou. In that moment, she realized that the conspiracy was deeper than just a few corrupt officials. It was a surgical operation designed to decapitate 2 movements at once. She sent me a message through a channel that only a few people in the world know about. It was a gamble. If I was part of the plot, she was walking into her own execution. If I was honest, she was our only hope. I sent her the coordinates to our east gate with a password that only a true son or daughter of this soil would understand. Sankara's vision. When she walked into my office, she didn't look like a victim. She looked like a general. She laid out her tablet and showed me the money trail. $400,000 had gone to members of my own summit committee. She showed me the thermal images of the basement. And then she looked me in the eye and asked, "President, are we going to let them win? Or are we going to show them that Africa has teeth?" This is the point where most leaders would have panicked. Most would have canceled the summit and called the foreign press to complain. But that is what they want. They want us to look weak. They want us to look like we can't handle our own affairs. If we canceled, the conspirators would just go back into the shadows and wait for the next opportunity. The mining companies would keep their contracts. The US dollar would remain the only currency used for our gold. Nothing would change. I looked at the map. I looked at the evidence. I thought about the grandmother in the village and the engineer in the diaspora. This wasn't just about a bombing anymore. This was about exposing the entire mechanism of neo-colonialism. We needed to catch them not just with the explosives, but with their hands on the trigger. We needed the world to see the face of the traitor and the face of the master pulling the strings. Grace suggested something that made even my military mind hesitate. She said, "Let the summit proceed, but move the real leaders. Fill that hall with your best soldiers in civilian clothes. Let them think their target is sitting right there. And when they reach for the detonator, we take them all." It was a plan that required perfect timing and absolute trust. If a single soldier flinched, or if Laurent realized we were on to him, the National Assembly would become a tomb for dozens of our brave men. But what is the alternative? To live in fear, to let these corporations dictate who leads us and who dies. No, we chose the path of fire. We decided to play the game on their level, but with our rules. We began the 30-hour countdown. Every minute felt like a year. I had to sit in meetings with Laurent, looking him in the eye, listening to him talk about security protocols, knowing that he had already signed my death warrant for a few pieces of silver. Think about the stakes for a moment. This isn't just about a building in Africa. If this summit had ended in a massacre, the global markets would have reacted instantly. Gold prices would have spiked. Oil delivery through the continent would have been disrupted. And you would have seen the impact at your local gas station and in your retirement accounts. Stability in Africa is not just an African issue. It is a global one. The people trying to blow up this summit were the same people who benefit from global chaos because it allows them to manipulate the markets. The trap was set. The soldiers were briefed. Bobi Wine was moved to a secure location that didn't exist on any map, and the world was watching, waiting for the opening ceremony of a summit they thought would be just another photo op. But they were about to see a lesson in African justice that would be whispered about in the boardrooms of Geneva for decades. But as the clock ticked down to the final hour, a new problem emerged. Laurent wasn't just planning to detonate the bombs from inside the building. He had a second signal, a fail-safe, being broadcast from a foreign ship off the coast. If we cut the power to the building, the secondary signal would trigger the explosives automatically. They had thought of everything, or so they thought. What happens when the hunter becomes the prey? What happens when the man you trust most realizes that he is standing in a room full of people who are ready to die to stop him? We were about to find out. If you are still with me, I want you to realize how close we came to total disaster. This is why we must stay united. I want to ask you a question that I asked myself that night. Africa can do it. Do you believe we are ready to face these giants without blinking? Type Africa can do it in the comments right now. Your voice is the shield that protects us. The air in the National Assembly building felt heavy that morning, almost as if the walls themselves knew they were being wired for a massacre. While the world saw images of black cars and polished boots arriving at the gates, the real battle was happening 60 feet underground. Grace Nalwanga had transformed herself from a high-level security chief into a ghost in maintenance coveralls. She moved through those damp, concrete corridors with the kind of calculated silence you only learn after years of surviving the toughest environments in Uganda. She wasn't just doing this for Bobi Wine. She was doing this for every African mother who has lost a child to a conflict funded by a foreign mining contract. I was in my office, staring at a screen, listening to her breathing through a tiny earpiece. Every scrape of her boot against the floor felt like a heartbeat. Colonel Diarra was beside me, his tactical teams positioned in the shadows of the city, ready to move but held back by the thin thread of our strategy. If we moved too early, the corporations would call it a military crackdown and use it to justify international sanctions. If we moved too late, the building would become a funeral pyre. This is the price of failure that our people are rarely told about. Failure here wouldn't just mean my death or Bobi Wine's death. It would mean a total economic collapse for the region. It would mean the US dollar would gain even more leverage over our resources as we fought each other in the chaos of a civil war. Grace reached the ventilation shaft. I heard the faint click of her camera turning on. The feed flickered to life on my desk. And for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. There they were, 16 military-grade explosive charges, strategically placed along the ceiling of the maintenance level, directly beneath the floor where the summit table was being set. These weren't crude, homemade bombs. These were high-velocity plastic explosives, the kind produced in European factories, designed to collapse a structure with surgical precision. And there, standing in the center of the room with a laptop in his hand, was Laurent. Seeing him on that screen was like a poison entering my blood. This was the man who had sat in my cabinet meetings, the man who had helped me draft our new mining laws. He was standing there, calmly checking signal relays, as if he were setting up a stage for a concert instead of a tomb for his brothers. He was taking orders from a voice on a satellite phone, a voice with a European accent, talking about asset protection and minimizing collateral interference. To them, we are not human beings with families and dreams. We are just collateral interference in their quest for $6 billion worth of rare earth minerals. But then, Grace panned the camera to a second laptop. My heart stopped. On that screen was a live video feed of me. They were watching my private office in real time. They saw me sitting there, They saw Colonel Diarra. They were waiting for us to react. It was a trap within a trap. If I ordered the raid, Laurent would see us coming on his screen and trigger the explosives before we even touched the door. He would die a martyr for his foreign masters, and I would be blamed for the explosion. The mainstream media would report Burkina Faso leader accidentally detonates building during failed security raid. They had written the script before the play even started. Grace whispered into the mic, her voice like ice. President, abort. They have you under surveillance. They are waiting for you to move. In that split second, I had to choose. Do I listen to the tactical experts who say run, or do I trust the spirit of Thomas Sankara? I looked at Colonel Diarra, and I saw the same fire in his eyes. We weren't going to run. We were going to change the script. I decided to use the one thing they didn't think I had the courage to use. The truth. Delivered live. I walked toward the official broadcasting equipment in my office. I knew they were watching me through their hidden cameras. I could almost feel Laurent's finger tightening on the trigger as he saw me stand up. But instead of calling for a raid, I signaled the national television network to go live. I wanted every person in Burkina Faso, every person in Uganda, and every member of the diaspora in the West to see what was happening. I spoke directly into the lens. People of Africa, what you are about to see is the reality of our struggle. I explained that the hall was filled with our brave soldiers, not the delegates. I announced that Bobi Wine was safe. And then I looked directly into the hidden camera they had placed in my office. I spoke to Laurent, 60 feet below the earth. Laurent, the world is watching you now. Your masters in Geneva cannot protect you from the light of the truth. If you press that button, you are not just killing soldiers. You are executing your own soul on live television. Through Grace's feed, I saw Laurent's face drain of all color. He looked at his laptop, then at the hidden camera, then at the ceiling. He realized the game was over. He was no longer a shadow operative. He was a criminal caught in the act before millions of viewers. In that moment of hesitation, Grace dropped from the ventilation shaft. She didn't use her gun. She used her training. She took him down before he could even blink. Her knee pinned to his chest as Colonel Diarra's team breached the doors. The relief was overwhelming, but it was followed by a chilling realization. This was happening in Burkina Faso today, but where else is it happening? How many other Laurents are sitting in the offices of African presidents right now, taking money from foreign conglomerates to sabotage our future? This is why we need to be vigilant. This is why we need to question everything the mainstream media tells us about stability and foreign aid. The aftermath was a whirlwind. We didn't just find explosives. We found the names, 9 high-ranking officials, 4 foreign operatives with diplomatic passports they didn't deserve, and the financial records. God, the records were a roadmap of greed. They showed exactly how much a human life is worth to a mining corporation. It turns out, to them, the future of Burkina Faso was worth less than the price of a luxury yacht in the Mediterranean. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. The explosives were cleared. The conspirators were in chains. And then I had to walk into the room where Bobi Wine was waiting. The man who had come to my country despite knowing his own security chief suspected me of murder. The silent question was hanging in the air, heavier than the explosives we had just removed. Before I tell you what that question was, I want to ask you something. If you were in my shoes, knowing that your closest ally was a traitor, would you have been able to keep your cool, or would you have let the anger take over? This is the burden of leadership in the new Africa. We are not just fighting for resources. We are fighting for the right to trust each other. Type Africa Rise in the comments if you believe that our unity is more powerful than their bombs. Let's show the world that we cannot be broken by betrayal. The silence that followed the arrests was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a deep, uncomfortable truth being processed. I sat across from Bobi Wine in a secure room, the kind of room where the walls are thick enough to hide the sound of a revolution. Grace Nalwanga stood by the door, her uniform torn, her face marked by the struggle she had just endured. She had saved his life, and in doing so, she had saved the very soul of this summit. But there was a question burning in my mind, a question that was heavier than the 16 explosive charges we had just removed from the earth beneath us. I looked at Bobi Wine, a man who represents the hopes of millions in Uganda and across the continent. I looked him in the eye and asked him directly, "Bobi, when did you know that I wasn't the one trying to kill you?" The room went cold. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of sirens. But inside that room, time seemed to stop. Bobi Wine didn't blink. He took a long moment, glancing at Grace, and then back at me. He said, "I didn't know, Ibrahim, not until I saw your face on that broadcast. My team found the money trail to your committee. We saw the secret movements in the basement. From where I was sitting, you were either the target or the architect. There was no third option. I felt a flash of anger, a natural human response to being suspected of such a heinous crime by a man I called a brother. I asked him, 'Then why did you come? Why walk into a lion's den if you thought the lion was waiting to eat you?' His answer is something every African leader, every person in the diaspora, and every young person watching this needs to memorize. He said, 'Because that is exactly what they want. These corporations and foreign powers want us to be so afraid of each other that we never sit at the same table. They want us isolated. They want us to believe that every hand extended in friendship is actually holding a dagger. If I had stayed in Uganda because I was afraid of you, they would have won without firing a single shot. They would have kept their mining contracts, and we would have kept our suspicions. I chose to trust the possibility of Africa rather than the certainty of their lies. That is the raw honesty that the mainstream media will never show you. They want to paint us as power-hungry men who only care about our own survival. But Bobi Wine showed me that true leadership is the ability to take a calculated risk for the sake of a larger vision. It is about being brave enough to be vulnerable. But then, I asked him the question that silenced the room for the second time. I asked, if the roles were reversed, if you were the host and I was the one with evidence of your betrayal, would you have come? Bobi Wine sat back in his chair. He didn't give a polished, political answer. He looked at his hands, then at the ceiling, and finally said, "Honestly, Ibrahim, I don't know. I want to say yes, but sitting here now, knowing how close we came to that floor blowing up, I don't know if I would have made the same choice." That honesty told me more about his character than any speech ever could. It showed me that we are all human, struggling with the same fears and the same weights of responsibility. This is the educational moment I want you to carry with you. Our enemies do not fear our armies. They do not even fear our resources. What they fear is this level of honesty. They fear leaders who are willing to admit their doubts but move forward anyway. They fear a new Africa where trust is a strategic choice, not just an emotion. They have spent centuries perfecting the art of divide and rule, but they have no defense against trust and build. It has been 6 months since that day in Ouagadougou. The rare earth mining operations are now under the control of a regional African partnership. The profits are not being siphoned off to offshore accounts in Geneva. They are building a new hospital in the north and a technical university where our young people can learn to refine our own minerals. Laurent is behind bars, facing the justice of a people he tried to sell out. The mining conglomerate that funded him is facing a 73% collapse in its stock value and criminal investigations in 7 different countries. We didn't just stop a bomb, we broke a system. But the fight is not over. As I stand in this office looking out over our capital, I know that they are already planning the next conspiracy. They are looking for the next Laurent. They are trying to find the next crack in our unity. This is why I need you to stay vigilant. This is why I need you to understand that your support for this channel and this movement is what keeps the truth alive. They control the airwaves, but we control the heartbeats of the people. To my brothers and sisters who are over 60, who have seen the promises of independence stolen from them decade after decade, do not lose heart. We are the generation that is finally finishing what you started. Your prayers and your wisdom are the foundation of everything we do. And to the young people, recognize the patterns. When you see a story in the media trying to turn one African nation against another, ask yourself who benefits from that division. Follow the money, and you will find the truth. Now, I want to close this with something different. I don't want your likes or your shares as a mere digital gesture. I want us to perform a ritual of commitment. This is for the soul of our continent. If you believe that we are stronger than their conspiracies, if you believe that Africa's wealth belongs to Africa's children, and if you stand with the courage of leaders who refuse to be divided, I want you to do 2 things. First, subscribe to this channel and hit that bell, because the truth is the only weapon that can't be jammed. Second, I want you to go to the comments right now and type Amen. I stand with Africa. This isn't just a comment. It is a vow. It is a signal to our enemies that we are united, we are conscious, and we are no longer afraid. Let the world see a wall of amens that no amount of money can break. I am Ibrahim Traoré. We have survived the 72 hours that almost destroyed us, and we have come out stronger. We are vigilant, we are united, and we are, finally, free. Say amen in the comments below if you are with us. I will see you in the next video, where the truth will continue to be told.